I settled into life happily after marrying a man from a wealthy family, and it seemed to me that the long-awaited stability that you so often dream of when you're still young and full of uncertainty had finally arrived in my life. I enjoyed every moment, from cozy evenings in our house with panoramic windows, to joint trips to wineries in California, where we slowly, as if unwilling to let go of the moment, savored every sip of wine, feeling the sun gently touching our skin. But one day, in the lobby of the hotel, a place that I so often associated with vacations, meetings and the noise of life, there was a meeting that disturbed my peace of mind. Mason, a man with whom I once had something like a past, stood in front of me, leaning on the back of an armchair, and, as always, with his condescending smile, mockingly noted my seemingly simple lifestyle. "You're still being reserved, Patricia," he said, as if that fact should have embarrassed me. I just nodded, maintaining the calmness that I had to train for years. It was my weapon, my armor, especially when talking to people like him. His voice, still sharp and confident, cut through my inner peace, disrupting the rhythm of my thoughts as he began teasing me with his latest news. "You know, I got married," he said casually, but there was a spark in his eyes that betrayed his true intention to make an impression. "And he didn't bother me with waiting too long. Her name is Eliza. She's the daughter of the president of Goldsmith Enterprises." He pronounced the last words with a special accent, as if the name was supposed to make me envious, maybe even reverent. Mason's laugh, clear and slightly deliberate, filled the air with a touch of pride, like the clink of glasses in an empty room, but it was this ominous mention of Goldsmith Enterprises that caught my attention. I knew that name, it was familiar, like a forgotten melody that I suddenly heard again, but at first I couldn't remember exactly where and how. And then, like lightning in a clear sky, it dawned on me. This name is written deeper into my life than Mason could have guessed. He continued to gloat, unaware of the ironic humor I found in his bragging, as if he had revealed something new to me, unaware that I already knew this story in my own way. And before we continue, write in the comments from which city you are watching this video. Enjoy watching. My name is Patricia. I am 37 years old. And I live in contentment with my husband, yes, with the very Mason who is now telling me about his new wife, as if it were part of a joke. It all sounded absurd, almost like a waking dream. I work in the family real estate business, in our company that has been passed down from generation to generation, where, as an only child, I perform mostly administrative duties with restraint and precision, following the details, because my father, a respected and strict man, still oversees the main strategic directions. I knew that one day I would be the head of this company, and therefore for many years I have been balancing between my personal and professional life, especially trying not to hurt Mason's ambitions. He only graduated from high school and works for a transportation company, doing difficult physical work, a job that I respect sincerely because I know it's not easy. And I try not to remind him about my university degree, about the road that could separate us, about my future, which, according to my father, should be presidential, but not in the country, but in the company. This is a topic that we hardly touch on. Mason and I met through a mutual friend during college. Mason's company then arranged for my friend's relocation, and that's when they introduced us. Interestingly, Mason initially showed interest in her, but after her refusal, fate, or maybe chance, allowed us to get to know each other better. His light nature, free-spirited, a little cocky, turned out to be an unexpectedly harmonious addition to my scrupulousness, my desire to plan and keep everything under control. Our relationship blossomed quietly but confidently, and we got married in the late 30s, after a brief but intense courtship. Our marriage was surprisingly smooth, and the warm acceptance from Mason's parents played a significant role in this, refreshing, almost gentle in its simplicity, contrasting with the usual tales of difficulties with mothers-in-law and mothers-in-law. Sometimes I caught myself seeing the features of my friend in his mother's face, the same severity hidden behind a soft smile. Despite the physically exhausting work that often kept Mason late into the evening, he remained devoted to our marriage, and even on the most difficult days, his concern and desire to be with me persisted. He always expressed gratitude when I left dinner and waited for him to return to have dinner together, a simple gesture, but there was so much warmth in it that my heart was squeezed with tenderness. I felt really happy around him. But, as often happens, a year after the wedding, our quiet, almost perfect life began to show signs of internal tension. It happened one night when we were about to go to bed. The light from the bedside lamp cast a warm circle on the wall, and in that soft silence, Mason suddenly brought up a topic we hadn't discussed much before. About the children. There was a hint of irritation in his tone, as if this topic had been bothering him for a long time, but he restrained himself for the time being. I was also thinking about my family and children, and although we didn't take any active steps, I believed that everything would happen by itself, without pressure, without a schedule. I tried to reassure him, it's only been a year, Mace, it's still ahead of us, really. It seemed to me that I was saying reasonable things, but he cited the figures more persistently than usual. Did you know that the probability of conception within a year for a couple who do not use contraception is about 90%? To be honest, I didn't understand such statistical details, and this figure seemed frighteningly high to me. I felt a chill run down my spine, and I said, trying not to show my excitement, if you're worried, maybe we should both get tested. I suggested thinking about how it would be wise to solve any potential problems together, as a couple, as two adults who are connected not only by love, but also by commitment, mutual respect, and a desire to move forward despite the difficulties. But Mason's reaction was unexpectedly harsh. He looked at me as if she had just insulted his dignity, and with venom in her voice, she said, "What are you implying? That it's my fault?" His tone, full of contempt and unaccustomed bitterness, pierced me like a needle. This was the first time he spoke to me in this way, and I, stunned, did not immediately find the words to respond. I didn't agree with him about anything. I wasn't accusing him at all. I wasn't pointing fingers. I wasn't trying to incriminate anyone. I just wanted us to walk this path together as a couple, sharing worries and hopes, not playing blame and punishment. I suggested a collaborative approach to finding clarity, but Mason, as if possessed by inner insecurity, immediately came to the conclusion that I considered him guilty, and as if to strengthen his position, he added, "This is definitely the woman's fault," with an expression on his face as if he enjoyed hurting me. With these words, as if he wanted to emphasize that the problem wasn't just not with him, it was with me, the whole thing. I wanted to protest, to tell him that it was unfair, that I was shocked by his words, but I was too stunned, barely managed to choke out, "Of course, so just take the test." I tried to keep my voice calm, even though I was seething inside. He didn't show the slightest interest in my feelings, but waved me off, "I'm too busy working," as if that explained everything. I sighed, "I have a job too, you know." But he just grimaced and cut her off abruptly, "You're just going with the flow in your father's company." Those words stung more than I expected. I've never gone with the flow. Yes, my role included many administrative tasks, and it might seem mundane from the outside, but inside the company I actively studied with my father, mastered managerial skills, participated in strategic sessions, and worked on projects that mattered. I was preparing to lead the company, not because I would inherit it, but because I believed in my right and my willingness. That night, despite my efforts to establish a conversation, any attempt at discussion on his part was met with coldness, with brief, cutting remarks, as if he had put a wall between us. We fell asleep with our faces turned away from each other, and the silence in the bedroom was so thick that you could touch it with your hands. There was something heavy and lingering in the air, like an understatement, like anxiety. Since then, Mason's attitude towards me has changed dramatically. He started coming home later and later, and one evening, when I returned home after a long, intense conversation with my father about the future of the company, I saw that not only was he not ready for dinner, as it was before, but he wasn't even going to start it. "I'm sorry, I just got home 15 minutes ago," he said tiredly, almost irritably. I hurriedly explained that I had just arrived, too, and added, trying to smooth things over, "I'll start cooking, just wait a bit, please." But he just waved it off with a cold smile. That's typical of the daughter of the boss of a small company. It became difficult for me to breathe. He did not understand, or did not want to understand, that we were not talking about some small company, but about a large structure with hundreds of employees, with an annual turnover of millions, with projects all over the country. His assumptions, his growing bitterness, which he carefully hid behind irony and fatigue, began to poison our daily lives, casting a shadow over those moments that were once filled with light and warmth. It became pointless to argue with him. His words were no longer an attempt to express an opinion, they became a weapon. I hurried to the kitchen, swallowing my resentment, promising Mason that I would cook dinner immediately. "I'll have a drink and relax while you cook," he muttered, and I just nodded, knowing how alcohol had become a kind of anchor for him, a way to escape from reality, to avoid a clash with his own emotions. I was sad, until my chest ached, that our relationship now depended on his evening drinks, on a glass of bourbon, which seemed to be the only way to maintain a fragile peace. I hated being rebuked or put in the position of a maintenance person, but if it helped to maintain at least a semblance of peace, even temporarily, I reluctantly accepted it as a necessary evil. The next day, Mason's cold demeanor did not disappear. When he left for work, he didn't even kiss me on the cheek, as he used to do, but said on the move, "Make sure dinner is ready when I get home." I took a deep breath, trying not to let the resentment spread inside me, and turned my attention to the day ahead. I planned a day off to finally do what Mason himself insisted on: get checked out by a gynecologist to check for fertility. Despite his reproaches and pressure, he refused to participate. It was painful going through this alone, but I knew complaining wouldn't help. If the problem was really with me, I wanted to know about it as soon as possible. I was ready to start treatment immediately, if necessary, realizing that age is a factor that cannot be argued with. Fertility is declining, time is working against us, and we can no longer delay. The clinic was overcrowded. I spent almost an hour in the waiting room, staring at the dim paintings on the walls and catching the conversations of other women who came with their worries. After a series of tests and an examination, the doctor informed me that the results would be available at the next appointment. I nodded, holding back my excitement. The possibility that I might actually have fertility problems scared me, but I was ready to take all the necessary steps to avoid being trapped in uncertainty. When Mason returned home that evening, I gathered the remnants of determination and confidence that had slowly eluded me in recent weeks and calmly but clearly told him that I had gone for a fertility test today, silently hoping for at least a shadow of support, a hint of sympathy, a ghostly reminder of those times when we were united in our dreams and intentions. But he just nodded indifferently and, with an indifference that made my stomach clench, said, "The CT data obtained. If you have problems, it's good that you take the test. Let me know the results." His words, cold and calculating, without a shadow of care, without a hint of a desire to be a part of this process, sounded like a verdict, like an alienated comment from an outside observer, and not a spouse with whom we share the same life. His implicit assumption that I was to blame for our difficulty conceiving hurt me more deeply than he might ever realize. 6 years have passed, and I turned 37, a time when the dream of motherhood, despite all my efforts, was becoming more and more distant, as if turning into a mirage. Our attempts to have a child became an endless series of hopes and disappointments, visits to doctors, analysis of basal temperatures and quiet night tears. But it seems that Mason resigned himself, gave up, decided that fatherhood was not for him, and instead of continuing to fight with me shoulder to shoulder, he gradually began to disappear, first into business, then into friends, and now into some other worlds where I was no longer invited. His late nights became more and more free, and sometimes he did not return home at all. When he showed up in the morning, he said with a grin that he drank and sang karaoke until dawn, and seemed proud of it, like a college student unencumbered by obligations or promises. His behavior seemed increasingly careless, if not irresponsible, and anxiety grew in me, followed by dull irritation. I did not know how to reconcile love and resentment, affection and a sense of betrayal. Meanwhile, my job was becoming more demanding. In my father's company, where I continued to grow as a manager, where I was already considered the future head, responsibilities multiplied, and the dream of a family had to be postponed, pushed further and further, as if it interfered with reality. But what had previously seemed like only personal pain now became unbearable, as Mason's actions took on forms that could no longer be ignored. His disregard for our life together became obvious, like an ulcer on the skin that could not be ignored. One day, when he left home on his day off, which in itself caused me to protest internally, because it was a rare time that we could spend together, I noticed that he had left his smartphone in the living room. Picking it up, I intended to take it to our room, put it on the bedside table without looking inside, but it was at that moment that the bell rang. A name appeared on the screen, Diana. Assuming it was one of his colleagues, I answered automatically, intending to explain that Mason had left his phone at home. But what I heard from the other end of the line made the blood boil in my veins. "Hi Mason, you're late, I've been waiting for 50 minutes. Hurry up or we'll be late for the park opening. It's been so long since we had a date, said a female voice, playful, affectionate, with intonations that could not be confused with either friendly or professional. I hung up quickly, my heart pounding, as if I'd been caught in something forbidden, but I was the devoted wife standing with his phone in my hands, and he was the one leading a double life. The proof of his infidelity burned in the palm of my hand. I felt a mixture of shock, anger, and something more painful, perhaps shame or powerlessness, rising from within, spreading through my body. While I was struggling with potential infertility, ready to do anything for our future family, he carelessly got involved in an affair, in some kind of life outside the house, outside of us. His recent estrangement suddenly made sense, as if someone had turned on a light in a dark room and I saw the whole picture, scary, crude, real. The realization that Mason no longer needed me, at least not the version of me that believed in us, was like a punch to the solar plexus. But the discovery of his betrayal made the situation almost unbearable. Determined to figure it out, to find the truth, to prove at least to myself that I wasn't going crazy, I began collecting evidence of his infidelities. It turned out to be easy to unlock his smartphone. His date of birth was set as a password, and once inside, I saw a call and message history full of exchanges with Diana, full of affectionate words, intimate hints that turned my stomach inside out. I carefully documented everything. I took photos of the screen on my phone, forwarded the necessary fragments to email, and all the while I tried to stay calm, returning his device to its usual place and behaving as if nothing had happened. A month passed in this terrible state of our broken marriage, a month of silent observation, patience, and internal destruction, until one day my father, the president of our company, called me into his office. "I have something important to discuss with you," he said solemnly, and his serious tone took me by surprise. I instantly tensed up, intuitively realizing that the news he was about to tell me would only exacerbate the inner anxiety that had long settled in me. That evening, perhaps sensing that something inevitable was coming, like a storm in which he himself was already beginning to lose his bearings, Mason, dining in silence across from me, suddenly broke the silence and, avoiding my gaze, suggested that we consider the possibility of parting. It almost sounded like a business proposal, like an agenda item, and to be honest, at that stage when each of our mornings began with a strained silence, and the evenings ended with different sides of the bed and no touching, I had been thinking for a long time about exactly how I should approach the issue of divorce, which lawyer to talk to, what documents will be required, how to divide the property, and in what tone to discuss all this with a man who betrayed me not only with his body, but also with indifference. Therefore, when he said this, his initiative seemed almost convenient to me, as if fate had saved me from having to bring up this topic first. I looked him straight in the eye and, without hiding my fatigue and slight irony, replied, "Yes, let's get a divorce." My agreement must have come too quickly, too decisively, because Mason seemed stunned by my willingness. Perhaps he was expecting a scene, tears, pleading, or, more likely, hoping that his path to Diana would be smooth and painless. I noticed a slight twinge in his face when he saw that my decision was final, and all I had to do was sign the papers. Despite the inner pain that I had been hiding so carefully, I signed the divorce papers, which, to my surprise, he had already prepared and brought with him in a neat folder. "I can file them tomorrow," he said matter-of-factly, as if it were about applying for a loan rather than ending years of marriage. "I'm leaving this house," he added, and only then, glancing at him, did I notice how much he really didn't understand what he was getting into. He asked casually, "Are you sure about the mortgage?" And I shrugged, barely able to contain my grin, as if this financial detail didn't matter anymore. Deep down, I suspected that he hadn't thought through his situation to the end, hadn't realized that it wouldn't be easy for him without me, with my stable salary, knowledge, and connections. His job was difficult, yes, but it was never stable or well paid, and I doubted his ability to handle mortgage payments alone, especially considering that he had already started living big, as if the future was assured. But given his infidelity, I didn't feel obligated to facilitate his transition to a new life, especially one in which I no longer had a place. I packed my things in silence, without scandals, without drama, and a few days later I moved back to my parents' house, to the very place where the walls remembered me as a little girl dreaming of great love and a home of my own. Mom and Dad, of course, immediately noticed the changes, my depression, fatigue in my eyes, which even smiles could not hide. At first, they were worried about my well-being, asked cautious questions, and offered help. But when I explained to them what had happened, told them about Mason's infidelity, about Diana, about that fateful phone conversation, they became enraged, and their anger was not theatrical, but sincere, almost fatherly maternal, the rage that is born only out of love for the child they want to protect. They fully supported my decision to leave him. Dad, restrained but determined, said, breaking up is the best course of action, and I couldn't disagree with that. I threw myself into my work, because it gave me structure, meaning, and a temporary refuge from pain. I took on everything in a row: reports, projects, presentations, negotiations, travel to branches, set up processes, everything just to avoid being left alone with myself. The year flew by in this fog of obligations, like one long week, without beginning or end, without holidays and weekends. One evening, noticing how disgusting I looked, pale, tired, without the spark in my eyes that used to be my calling card, Dad worriedly suggested that I take a break. "Why don't you go on a trip? There will be a lot to do starting next month," he said softly, almost with fatherly affection, and his concern warmed me like a blanket on a winter evening. Grateful for this offer and feeling my strength drain away, I decided to go on a solo trip to the Northeast, to a place where there were no familiar streets, no memories, no past, just me, the cold wind, and the opportunity to start all over again. The air in the Northeast was fresh and penetrating, as if it cleansed not only the lungs, but also the soul. I talked to the locals, simple, friendly people who, not knowing my history, treated me with genuine warmth. Gradually, day by day, my spirit began to heal, like a healing wound that is no longer touched by dirty hands. I decided to treat myself and booked a stay in Los Angeles, in one of those famous hotels where every guest feels chosen. I wanted the best experiences, well-deserved peace, a vacation that would not be accompanied by feelings of guilt or anxiety. After checking in, I relaxed in the lobby with a welcome drink in my hand, looking at the elegant interiors, feeling my fatigue dissolve in this light and space. I was so calm that I even half-jokingly thought about moving to Los Angeles. Maybe this is where my new stage will begin? But just then, like a knife cutting through serenity, a familiar voice pierced my consciousness. Hey, what are you doing here?" I turned around, startled, and saw Mason walking into the lobby with 2 huge suitcases, like a scene from a movie that no one asked me to watch. An unexpected meeting with my ex-husband in this place, where I came for peace and recovery, was the last thing I expected. Surrounded by the elegant charm of a Los Angeles hotel lobby, I felt a sudden jolt of reality, like an icy wave crashing down on me. And it hurt even more when I saw a young woman walk in with him, maybe Diana, maybe someone new in her early 20s, with flawless skin, bold makeup, and bright red nails that stood out in stark contrast to the northeastern chill. Her outfit was defiantly revealing, a short skirt, despite the cold, and at that moment I realized that this man had finally left the life where we were we. My gaze, dumbfounded, stopped on them, on this strange couple who had so suddenly emerged from my past, like a scene from an old, painful dream come to life, and at that moment, despite all attempts to maintain dignity, I could not help but utter the words that escaped by themselves, without hesitation and without a plan. "Why are you here, and who is she?" My curiosity, contrary to common sense and fatigue from old wounds, got the better of me. I just couldn't stay indifferent, no matter how much I wanted to. Mason seemed pleased with the opportunity to showcase his new life, and as he adjusted the collar of his jacket, he said with a note of smug excitement, "Oh, let me introduce you. I haven't seen you in a long time. This is Diana, my new wife. We're on our honeymoon. And guess what? She's the daughter of a rich businessman." These words sounded like a poorly played fragment of a theatrical play, with a clear emphasis on the word rich, and I felt the name Diana wash over me like a powerful wave in icy water. Yes, it was the same Diana whose voice I had once heard in that ill-fated phone conversation, and whom I couldn't forget it then. I felt a surge of discomfort, not so much from her presence, but from the defiant pride with which Mason pronounced her name, as if it were the main prize in the lottery, which he won by betraying our lives. He married a woman almost half his age and, in his opinion, thereby won a new game in which status, money, and last name became the most important. "Are you here alone?" "It's sad," he continued with a contemptuous grin, a hint of cruelty in his voice that had previously been masked by indifference. Diana, who was standing next to him, exchanged glances with him and, without hiding her condescension, with an irritated tone and a slight sneer, she threw, "Hey, Mason, is this your ex-wife? She looks old. Hurry up with the registration." I did not allow myself to show the slightest irritation, although her words cut like a knife, and only the inner calmness, so carefully cultivated over the past year, helped me maintain my composure. Mason put his arm around her shoulders, casually, as if holding her up like a trophy, and with a bittersweet bravado declared, "Yes, I'm ready for life. Now I'm married to money, and you keep fighting for your humble life." His high-pitched laugh, which for a second seemed to thicken the air in the lobby, disrupted the serene atmosphere into which I had just begun to sink. He persisted, continuing to flaunt his new reality with undisguised delight. "Yes, Diana is Goldsmith's daughter. Do you know Goldsmith Enterprises?" He added with the intonation with which the names of the royals are pronounced, as if the very fact of being associated with this surname makes him special. The mention of Goldsmith Enterprises rang in my memory like an ancient bell, clearly, sharply, suddenly, and I remembered where I had heard that name, right at the moment when Mason's face lit up with childish glee. "Impressive," I drawled, trying to keep my tone calm. "Yes, her family is well off. They even paid off our mortgage on the house quickly. Thanks for making the divorce easier, Patricia," he added sarcastically, savoring every word, not noticing how stupid he looked in his attempt to hurt me. I just nodded, almost imperceptibly, and replied in a measured voice, "Yes, I know them. They're in that big building downtown, right?" I was there. My calmness seemed to confuse Mason somewhat. He looked surprised, leaned forward slightly, squinted, as if trying to figure out if I was joking. "Oh, you were there? Well, her family owns a huge company, so breaking up with you was the right choice," he said, grinning wryly, like a little boy showing off a new toy. I nodded again and added casually, with a slight nonchalance, as if recalling a minor detail from an old conversation, "That building is part of our real estate assets." Their reaction was not long in coming. "What do you mean, our real estate?" Mason and Diana interrupted me almost simultaneously, their voices sounding puzzled and incredulous. I allowed myself a small smile, as if amused by their confusion, and looking them straight in the eye, I continued, "My father rents this building for his most prestigious office. I'm not sure if your company is involved in real estate, but it's definitely not a shabby building." Their skepticism hung in the air, thick as fog before a storm. "Yes, I know how grand it is," I continued, keeping my cool. "I was there when my father recently bought it, for about $500 million. He complained about the tenant not paying rent. It turned out it was your company." For a second, there was deathly silence, as if the entire hotel had come to a standstill, and even the faint sound of the fountains in the lobby receded into the background. "Actually, my father is a real estate mogul with assets worth about $5 billion, I added calmly, as if I were talking about the weather, "and this building is one of his. Goldsmith Enterprises has been the tenant for the last few months and they haven't paid the rent." I told them, carefully watching their faces, and when Diana laughed, there was no amusement in her voice, but fear disguised as mockery. "It can't be true. Our company is working great," she claimed, but there was an alarming gleam in her eyes. Her laughter was trembling, and every word sounded less confident. Despite the shock of seeing Mason with his new wife, I was determined not to get involved in their drama, not to let a single word or look stir my wounds. However, Diana's loud statements that their company was certainly capable of paying rent echoed through the marble walls of the lobby, bouncing off the golden chandeliers and reflected in the mirrored columns, and her tone, dismissive and condescending, clearly hinted that she considered my words a lie, an invention, a desire to create discord between her and Mason, and it was not only insulting, but also funny, considering how much they had no idea who they were really dealing with. Realizing that a simple conversation would not be enough, and anticipating that none of my arguments, no matter how sound, could shake their confidence without direct, indisputable evidence, I took out my smartphone right there in the hotel lobby, not caring about the views of outsiders, because at that moment the truth was much more important. Decency. "I'm here with the daughter of the owner of Goldsmith Enterprises," I told my father on the phone, keeping an expression of calm superiority on my face, Can you send me a photo of the rental reminder? And less than 5 minutes later, he, always punctual and methodical, sent me a clear, official image of the notification, where it was stated in black and white, the debt for 4 months of rent, addressed to the very company to which Diana proudly attributed her wealth. I silently turned the phone screen to Mason and Diana, letting the numbers and seals speak for me, knowing that no amount of their excuse would block out the evidence shining from the display. Let's see, if you don't pay soon, we may have to consider filing a lawsuit. What are you going to do? I asked calmly, without malice, but with that cold clarity with which one pronounces the final words to the condemned. Diana's confidence wavered. She looked at the screen, then at me, then at Mason, and, lowering her eyes, muttered, "If you think about it, my father has been stressed lately, talking about slow sales and firing a lot of employees." Her voice trailed off, as if the words were losing their power as they were uttered. However, Mason, not wanting to lose face in front of his new wife, jumped up to defend his illusion, as if he were losing the last bet. "You're just trying to trick us and tear us, aren't you? You're still that kind of person," he shouted, and his voice, harsh, almost hoarse, cut through the lobby, making me involuntarily step back, shocked not by the very content of his words, but by how familiar that tone sounded. This anger, this accusation, I had heard it all before, at a time when our marriage was bursting at the seams, and every word I said was met with an outburst of anger, as if I were not a wife, but an enemy. His words brought back painful memories, a swirl of scenes filled with reproaches, accusations, and his cold eyes when I was broken and silent. But now I wasn't that woman anymore. "What are you saying, Mason?" I said, looking at him with indifferent surprise. "Do you really think I still have feelings for you? How stupid I was to suffer for so long because of someone like you. Actually, I'm sorry that Diana contacted you." I said it in an even but firm voice, like a judge pronouncing a verdict, without hatred, but also without forgiveness. "You only married her for her money. Just like I used to be. You've always had exceptionally empty reasons. You were in a hurry to get married, you wanted children, and who left me when they found out we couldn't have children? Who called me useless because of infertility? It was you. It's all your fault. But do you still think that I have feelings for you? You must be crazy." The words came easily, because the truth finally broke through, freeing me. Mason's face turned red with anger, his lips trembled, and in response he exhaled, almost shouting, "You're just an old, arrogant hag. You probably won't be able to get married or have children anymore. And Diana and I are planning to have fun and have a baby after this trip." His voice was hoarse, strained like a string about to break, and it became clear to me that he was desperately trying to hold on to the illusion of his new life. It was when his pathetic accusations began to sound almost comical that I decided it was time to put an end to this spectacle, to reveal the truth as the last card I had up my sleeve. "Oh, did I mention that?" I began calmly, looking at their confused faces. "I'm 5 months pregnant. I'm in a stable phase, and that's why my father suggested I go on this trip, to relax." My words were smooth, like the rustle of the pages of an old book read to the end. It happened right after our divorce. I've met someone who really supports me. My boss at work, as it turns out, he's my father's subordinate. He has been a great support to me, both personally and professionally. I found out I was pregnant just 5 months ago. It was a quick marriage, but my company and my father celebrated it on a grand scale, and after saying that, I felt like the weight that had been hanging on my shoulders for years suddenly disappeared. Mason's face fell, his eyes darted, and all his former bravado evaporated like morning mist under the rays of the midday sun. Are you pregnant? So, did you use birth control?" The question was so ridiculous that I couldn't help but feel a mixture of pity and relief looking at it. He seemed to be trying his best to cling to at least some detail that would give him back control of the situation, but all he had left was an empty shell. My life came out of the chaos he brought into it. Now, more than ever, I was confident in my path forward, strengthened by the support of my new husband and the inevitable responsibility that lay ahead for me, to lead my father's company, especially since he planned to retire soon due to health reasons. My future, although it was once inextricably intertwined with Mason's fate, now, more than ever before, belonged only to me, built on the foundation of new beginnings, on calm and mature freedom from his lingering shadow, from those memories that previously held me captive to regrets and unrequited feelings. Mason's confusion was almost palpable. It hung in the air when, lost, confused by my words, he abruptly stamped his foot, like a child unable to cope with the unexpected refusal of reality to follow his rules. Contraceptives. Revelation. "I've never done this," he muttered, as if to himself, as if searching for clues that would prove his point. I looked at him calmly, not without a shadow of regret, but without the old pain. "Do you remember when I told you that I had passed all possible tests at the clinic? They didn't find any problems with me." "So it wasn't just me," I said, emphasizing the last word, as if summing up everything he had once refused to admit. Mason turned pale, his face contorted with realization, from the sudden collision with the truth that he had rejected for so many years. He whispered, barely audibly, looking at the floor, as if a hole had opened under his feet. "Does this mean that Diana and I can't have children? Why did I divorce you to marry her?" His shoulders slumped, like a man who has lost not only his arguments, but also the ground under his feet. Diana, who was standing next to him, instantly flushed, anger blazing in her eyes like a fire ignited by his selfish logic. "What do you mean? Did you feel betrayed because you were infertile and not her?" Her voice was sharp, almost shrill, and there was not only resentment in it, but also the despair of a woman whose choice turned out to be as illusory as the feelings on which it was based. Realizing that my role in this conversation was over, and not wanting to participate in this spectacle of resentment and disappointment, I made my last statement, calmly, clearly, with the professional detachment that life has taught me. "So from now on, please keep your affairs separate from mine," I said, feeling the last thread that connected me to their chaos leave me. "As for the lease to Goldsmith Enterprises, I expect full payment. If you intend to continue renting the building, please pay off the overdue rent as soon as possible. Otherwise, we will have to go to court. I have nothing more to tell you." With that, I turned around and left Mason and Diana alone with their argument, their accusations, and my own illusions, walking confidently back to my hotel room. The silence of the hallway was like a balm, like relief after a noisy storm, and when I opened the door, I was greeted by the very smile that was worth going through all this for: warm, sincere, accepting. "Welcome," my husband said. "I'm sorry, I couldn't help around the house. Is everything okay?" "Of course, everything was fine," I replied, allowing myself to truly relax for the first time all day. "I'm just glad that we could, exhale." "Thank you, Patricia," he said, and there was no shadow of doubt in his voice, no desire to prove anything, just sincere concern. Since I married my current husband, I have felt my confidence grow every day, not an imposed one, not a mask, as it once was, but a real, creative one. I thought Mason had completely faded into the background, becoming just a memory, but as it turned out, fate had not yet put an end to it. I didn't see Mason again after that day, but through my father's business channels, rumors reached me, and then the facts. Mason and Diana's situation deteriorated dramatically. Despite his initial bravado and belief that he married for wealth, he soon learned that Goldsmith Enterprises was mired in debt. Disturbing news began to surface on TV channels one after another. An employee of the company had embezzled millions belonging to clients. Diana's father, as it turned out, knew about this fraud, but tried to hide the truth, hoping to protect the company's reputation, perhaps even for the sake of his daughter. However, as soon as the scandal became public, the shares of Goldsmith Enterprises collapsed at an alarming rate, and the company lost the trust it had been accumulating for decades. A mass exodus of employees followed. Panic began within the team, and in such a deplorable state it was clear that not only would they not be able to cover the rent, but they were unlikely to ever recover from this blow. This turn of fate was the last confirmation for me that I had made the right decision when I left this chapter of my life. I closed it, not with anger, not with vindictiveness, but with quiet relief, with a sense of liberation. Now all my attention was focused on the future, full of stability, mutual love, and sincere affection for the person with whom I finally felt in my place.